If you go online and research a bit about Thanksgiving, you may see that in the past years there seems to have been a growing movement of people who have the opinion against celebrating Thanksgiving, that we should not celebrate this day. And the reason being, because of the rough history between American colonists and Native Americans. That, of course, as we know from history, that there has not been always a good relationship, that there has been hostilities and injustices that have occurred towards indigenous peoples by colonists. So because of this rough history, there's a movement of people who say that we shouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving. But it seems to me that all the reasons people say we shouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving, it actually seems that it's all the more reason why we should, to respond to those very things. You see, the stories we tell and the stories we live by shape our lives. They embody our ideals of what we are to be. And as I was reflecting on this day of Thanksgiving, there's 3 stories sort of bound up in this day of Thanksgiving that are worth remembering. The first story, of course, is the story of the first Thanksgiving, which many of us learned in school growing up, of how the Pilgrims and the Indians, or Native Americans, came together in 1621 and shared a meal together, giving thanks together for the harvest. Now, some people say, well, this story, as we learned in school, isn't exactly how it happened in the history books. That apparently the Native Americans showed up to see what was going on, but weren't really invited. It's kind of like a family showing up at your house to snoop what's going on, and found out that there's a meal, and ended up inviting themselves in for the meal. But regardless of how exactly it happened, the point is that historically they did, at one point, sit down and share a meal together. And that's a story worth remembering. Because, of course, the image of breaking bread together is a sign of being at peace with someone, of brotherhood, of harmony. And it seems, if we look at our history and see the poor treatment of Native Americans, it seems all the more reason why we should, in fact, emphasize this story. That there have been moments that it is possible for people to sit down to break bread together in peace, reconciliation, a brotherhood that crosses cultural, ethnic, tribal boundaries, etc. But the second story of Thanksgiving, is how Thanksgiving came to be a national holiday. That in the 1800s, there was a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale who was writing to the presidents, encouraging them to institute Thanksgiving as a national holiday. It was commemorated in different forms, but not consistently on a particular day, and it varied from region to region. So Sarah Josepha Hale wrote a number of presidents, and finally, it was President Abraham Lincoln who responded. And he instituted Thanksgiving on October 3rd, 1863. It was during a time, of course, in the midst of the Civil War, when the nation was on the verge of being ripped apart, where literally brothers were fighting against brothers, family members against family members, and that there was a whole population of people who were enslaved. That it was during this that Abraham Lincoln saw the importance of re-emphasizing, representing this story. As brothers are fighting against brothers, as a nation's being ripped apart, to hold up a story of people coming together from various backgrounds, various worldviews, various ideologies, sitting down together and sharing a meal in peace. and giving thanks. And so I want to share with you an excerpt of Abraham Lincoln's words of his formal proclamation of Thanksgiving from October 3rd, 1863. The part I share here is just an ending excerpt, but the actual proclamation is longer, and it's worth your time to go and read it in its entirety and reflect on it. But here's what Abraham Lincoln said when he instituted Thanksgiving, October 3rd, 1863. I do therefore invite my fellow citizens in every part of the United States to set apart and observe the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. And I recommend to them that while offering up the ascriptions justly due to him, they do also with humble penitence for our national perverseness and disobedience commend to his tender care all those who have become widows, orphans, mourners, or sufferers in the lamentable civil strife in which we are unavoidably engaged, and fervently implore the interposition of the Almighty hand to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it as soon as it may be consistent with divine purposes to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. That it seems all the more that we live in a time that we need these stories of people coming together in harmony, peace, brotherhood, and reconciliation. That they saw when the nation was being ripped apart, that Abraham Lincoln saw the importance of doing so, dedicating a day for that. And as our world today has ongoing conversations about race, racism, injustice, oppression in various forms, it's all the more reason why we need this story. When there's political divides in our world today, people are upset about various political strifes and so on, it seems all the more reason why we need this story. Not ignoring wrongs that have been done in the past, but both asking for forgiveness, but also choosing to lay down our resentment and bitterness and wrongs done to us, to break bread together in peace. And this brings me to the third story. First, the story of the Pilgrims and the Native Americans. Second, the story of Abraham Lincoln instituting Thanksgiving. But the third story that is bound up in these two stories, that I would argue is at the heart of these two stories. At 2,000 years ago, a man sat down at supper with his 12 apostles and held up the bread and wine and said, "This is my body given up for you. Take this and drink this cup. This is the cup of my blood poured out for forgiveness of sins." They had a meal together, of course, breaking bread together as a sign of peace. But a meal at which at the heart is the commemoration of a person unjustly and wrongfully hurt, yet choosing love instead of bitterness, choosing to offer peace to those who inflict hurt to him, who extends hands for reconciliation no matter how many times they are whipped away. And for us as Catholics, this Thanksgiving meal of Christ is at the heart of our worship. And in a way is the heart of every story worth telling. And in fact, we call the meal that we celebrate a Thanksgiving meal. The word Eucharist that we refer to communion means thanksgiving. And that it's this story, the story of Christ's sacrifice, and the way we mystically are drawn into that in this meal together, that shapes all other stories. So as we reflect on this national holiday, as we go forth in thanksgiving, and as we reflect on this, yes, in our history of our nation, there have been terrible injustices and oppressions in our history, racism and mistreatment, and so on. But that's exactly why we need these stories. Pilgrims and Native Americans coming together for a meal. The story that was told again in the midst of a nation divided. And the story of a meal of thanks given to us by Christ that has forgiveness at its heart. And so as we enter into this Thanksgiving, I guess while I'm holding up that, certainly it's about gratitude and giving thanks, but that deep gratitude to recognize that all I have and am is sheer, total, and undeserved gift from God. And the gratitude for his divine mercy that's been extended to me. I think of that famous American hymn, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. It's that deep gratitude that leads to reconciliation. We need these stories more than ever. Not only a story of gratitude, certainly of that, but also breaking bread together in the peace of reconciliation. The peace that was brought by the blood of the cross, by the blood of Christ on the cross, that binds us together in love. Amen.